Welcome back to Friday at 5, another episode of great conversation with eminent school leaders and eminent contributors to school education. Today, we have a really interesting topic that we want to take up, and it comes about because there is a statement in the National Education Policy that we need to do away with the culture of rote learning and we need to move towards a culture of understanding, a culture of developing learning skills in our students, 21st century skills, conceptual understanding, etc. So, to have this wonderful discussion, if we really want to kill rote learning or kill the culture of rote learning, let me put it that way, because rote learning is just a different form of memorization technique. There is definitely a place for rote learning in an education system. I'm a mathematician, and nobody can know it better than me that when you have to memorize all those formulas of integration and trigonometry, sometimes you need to do, you need to memorize them through a process of infinite repetitions. And that process of infinite repetitions is really rote learning. So there might be a place for rote learning. We need to understand what that place is. Is it important? But the dangerous element here is the culture of rote learning. So there is a difference between you know whether so there is one question is obviously uh, should rote learning be part of the teaching learning process, uh, or should it be eliminated altogether? That is one question that we need to address as educators. The second question is uh, the culture of rote learning, where we see students. I mean, this is my personal experience I'm sharing with you. I've seen students who are really scared of mathematics actually memorize algebra problems. I've seen those questions, those students, so it's fine. All of us know that students memorize the geometry theorems, the proofs. All of us know students memorize, even geometry problems in the textbook. But I've seen people do that with algebra also. I have seen, in fact, I've not seen, I have been one of the students in my school who used to memorize English essays because we knew only 5 English essays would come in the examination, and they were standard. If it's if it's a final exam, we knew what the topics would be, and if it is half yearly, we knew what the topics would be. So I remember I used to memorize the Hindi essay on Diwali, because it was a standard essay that would come in most of the exams. And why use my brain in being creative about it? Just memorize it. And I passed my school well. There was nothing wrong with that. CBSE exam is notorious for being, sorry, sir, I'll take that liberty now that you're not there anymore. So CBSE is notorious for setting up question papers in different subjects, which can be easily, you can score an easy 70% or above only by memorizing. Special cases are economics, for example. Economics class 12th examination, I was told somewhere that if you have a set of 150 questions, and if you memorize those 150 questions, the question paper cannot be outside of those 150 questions. So these kind of things are happening. Where do we draw the line, I think, is the question. uh, how much of rote memorization is essential? How much is dangerous? And so when does it become dangerous, and when is it helpful to us? That's one question. And the second question is, let's assume that we want to break away from rote learning. than thinking. Thinking requires more effort. So, and also for teaching, if you want to teach a subject which demands conceptual learning, conceptual clarity, conceptual understanding, then the planning towards teaching that particular subject has to be a lot more. It's also easy. So part of the reason why we are living in this culture of rote learning is also the fault of the teachers, because we found it easy to spoon feed. And because we found it easy to spoon feed, our students get used to spoon food feeding at a very early age, uh, even at foundational years, or the preparatory years that the new NEP calls it. So, two questions. Where do we draw the line? When does it become dangerous? Second question, if we have to get out of the culture of rote learning, what is it that we as educators can do? I could not have hoped for a better panel to take up these two particular topics. Obviously, we have with us Mr. Bala Subramanian, who is former director academics with CBSE. He is one of the pillars and founding pillars of ICSL, and we always look forward to his interventions in matters of when things become really confusing, like rote learning. We really require him to come up and show up, because this is a topic which is going to be discussed over the next decade, and everybody's going to be fighting over it. We also have Dr. Neeta Bali. She has a doctorate in counseling psychology, and currently she is the director and head of school of GD Goenka World School at Sona Road. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for taking out the time to be with us. We are also privileged to have with us Arati Nagaraj. She is the Dean of STEM at Purkal Youth Development Society in Dehradun, where they work a lot with underprivileged girl students. And she, before that, she was the president of Saratoga Union District School District in California. She was with the district for about 10 years, and she has her master's in education focusing on technology and educational technology from Boston University. Thank you, Arati. Thank you for joining us. So, my first question for all of us: what is the role of rote learning in education? Where does it become dangerous? Where is it absolutely essential and we can't live without it? So I'll open the discussion with Dr. Neeta Bali. I would like to hear you first, and then I'll go over to Arati, and then I'll go to Balasi after that. So let's just take this one common and maybe 2 minutes to share, 1 or 2 minutes. We'll try to keep our answers short so that in half an hour we can address some crucial topics, and then I have some questions that people have asked me, and then we can address those questions. Also, to my audience, if you have any question for any of the panelists, please put it in the question and answer tab and not the chat, because that will make sure that we can take up those questions, and the panelists can also look at the tab to see which ones they want to address. So over to Dr. Bali.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nishchal. First, I'd like to understand, why is it that we are calling it killing the rote learning? We don't need to kill the rote learning. Why are we decrying it so completely? It's got its advantages, it's got its benefits, and I'd like to dwell very, very briefly on some of the advantages of rote learning, because all of us have studied in schools where there was a lot of emphasis on rote learning, and I don't think we've done very badly for ourselves. But having said that, some of the advantages of rote learning, I think it frees up your working memory, because a lot of what you learn by rote frees up your brain's scratch pad, so to say. When you have learned something by rote, you are able to recall that information very quickly, overall, and you sometimes retain that information for life. I can tell you for one that, the things that you learn from those general knowledge books, for example, the currency of various countries or the capitals of various countries, and so on and so forth, those are things that you have learned and you've learned for life. And those are things that you need to learn, and you can only learn by rote learning. Some of the other things I feel that you can only learn by rote are the timetables, the days of the month, the days, the months, the history dates, right? Some lines of a poem, also some lines of a play, maybe some grammatical terms, perhaps the alphabet for that matter. I don't see an alternative, not yet. The alphabet, so maybe parts of the human body, some foreign languages. Those are things that you simply learn by rote. So you can't do away with rote learning so completely, because if you don't have that corpus of rote learning, then your mind is not free to think, so to say. But so you need to memorize some things verbatim. There's no escaping it, and then you bring them into your working memory, because that way it frees up your working memory, right? But at the same time, a very relevant question: where is it that you draw a line? You draw a line when you realize that the learner now looks exasperated and bored, when the learner is not learning skills. Because when a learner is merely relying on what they have learned by rote and not picking up the necessary skills, as an educator who has been associated with the World School for almost 11 years now, I realize that since in an international curriculum, there is very, very little emphasis on rote learning, definitely much more emphasis on skill building. So unless, but the moment you see, it's alarming when you see that children are not exercising their power of thinking, critical thinking. If they're not exercising their power of critical thinking, they're not exercising their power of ferreting out information. When you don't see the eagerness of inquiry, that is what is alarming. And that's where they're unwilling, they're reluctant to ask questions. The moment you see that they're reluctant to ask questions, I think that is what makes it very, very alarming. And that's where you need to start drawing a line. But we can't completely decry rote learning and say, let's kill it. I don't think we can kill it so completely.
I totally agree with you. The title of this show was media driven, it was marketing driven, and maybe we forgot to put the question mark after it. So I think the idea, you're absolutely right, that when it starts preventing us from thinking,
Mhm.
there is a time to draw a line. Okay, Arathi, over to you. Your views on where is the line for you, and what is the role of rote learning in the whole process?
So thank you. I actually, partially agree with what Dr. Bali has to say. There is a place for it. There are certain things that have to be memorized, but I think it's more about when do you ask the student to memorize it, right? Is it you start with memorization, or do you, or rote memorization, or do you give the foundational concepts of the why behind, let's take the maths table, right? Times tables. Do you give them that concept of why is 5 times 5 25, the quantity, right? You give them that foundational concept first, and then you go into that rote memorization. Okay, that's how you get, then you start. But it's not about recitation of, those times tables. It's more about that getting that understanding first, which then goes into that capacity of memorization. So I think it all, I don't like to compartmentalize it either, because there are certain things that should be memorized, but, and also there are some students who just can't memorize. It just doesn't come. You have to kind of think about where each child is, or each learner is, and, take it from there. And also concepts, some remember it through, associative memory, versus some do it by rote. So you got to think about it through that. So again, it's not about, again, yeah, it's not about killing, but it's about finding the right time and place and concept for this method of learning. That's
Thank you, Rathi. I think you've said it very well. I can tell you from my experience, the most the examination that I used to be scared of the most was history, because before the history exam, I remember there used to be a guide called Kundra and Bawa, and I
mm,
used to go on my rooftop of my house, and I would just walk and keep on memorizing that Kundra and Bawa, because I had no idea what Akbar did and why he did it, but I had to memorize it. So, and that was like, oh wow, solving math questions was always easier, no matter how hard they were, than memorizing Kundra and Bawa. So you're
I'm
absolutely
right.
right.
I'm
The,
right there with you about the Kundra and Bawa. I did that too.
oh,
So,
great.
and
Hail Kundra and Bawa, but I think you're absolutely right. The big question of what comes first. Okay,
Mhm.
do we explain the math concept, or any concept for that matter? Anything. Do we explain the concept first and then ask them to memorize because it's required, or do we start off with memorization? I think that's also a very important point. Bala sir, your views on the topic.
Well, I have some fundamental conflicts in the very statement, as I said, which is, of course, not new, which is prevalent for a long time. There are two words. One is learning, the other is memorization. These are like the two, the rails of an engine, right? And you cannot superimpose one over the other, right? Now, memorization is a process wherein a data or an information is collected and recorded in the brain. Okay, it need not have an element of thinking. But when you define learning, learning is by a synthesis of the sensory integration that's happening, inputs coming through, which is synthesized and which results in the meaning making process of the brain. Okay, therefore, the learning is largely experiential, and the kind of experience could be different. But in terms of memorization, you don't need a kind of an experience. It is simply assimilation and recording. And a learning process could lead to, they have got a very close link. Learning can lead to, formulation of memory, but all that learning could be either volatile memory, short-term memory, or long-term memory, because memory, in terms of memorization, contextually at this point of time, memorization is not a natural process of the brain. Learning is a natural process of the brain. Brain sciences have very clearly said that the brain is not made for any formal learning, right? It learns in spite of all the formalities that you have in the system, right? But why do we have the so-called rote learning? Because we largely over the years adopted a system of what is called Shruti and Smriti, right? Wherein the teacher taught, we assimilated, recorded, because there were no other instruments of verification of the data, and therefore it had to be recollected over a point of time. And as was pointed out by other colleagues over here, that the memory is a very strong way of recording, collecting, and storing the information. And this memory can also be used for thinking, right? But learning is an outcome of thinking, right? Right? Whereas the objective of learning and the objective of memorization are entirely different. Okay, but what we are trying to do is, because the objective is to pass an examination, and our focus is equally, to get marks, and therefore we use memory rather than learning, right? Because memory leads to a result and an end product. Learning need not, because learning is a highly personalized product, right? Therefore, I would very likely to clear, and there has been a beautiful experiment by Hahnemann, who found out that anything which is taught in a classroom, right, after a period of 2 hours, 70% of the people forget it, right? And lots of things I would not like to go for shortage of time, but therefore the point is that it was said very clearly that emotionally competent stimuli provide effective learning, which results in the long-term memory. But when emotions are not available, it goes to the volatile memory and forgotten. That's why in a classroom, when the teacher teaches along with the emotions, right, it goes into the long-term memory and results in learning, right? But when the teacher doesn't teach with, with emotions, it becomes just a data or information, and it need not go into that. It becomes a boring process. The question before you is, you said notoriously CBSE was using that. I would very like, I like the term, but I would like to tell you this notoriety is absolutely across the country, because we are all, what do you call, we want to result, rather facilitate convenience. Everywhere you charge a convenience fee. So you conduct an examination for the convenience of the students rather than, that. So I believe there is nothing called a rote memory learning at all. If you go into study, a lot of work on that. He talks about what is called learned helplessness, right? Because we have learned, the father has learned by memorization, and other people have learned, and socially have led to a conditioning of the brain by what is called the process of that. This is a kind of learned helplessness. I will take half a minute and tell you a small story and finish it off. This is a very story. There was a saint in a village, right? He was talking a lot. Maya, this is Maya, that's Maya, and all that. So the saint said, "You stay with me for some time." Days passed on. The saint did not teach him. After a couple of days, the king says, "You will not take a step without telling me what Maya is all about." Immediately, the saint goes and holds to a tree nearby, catches hold of a tree and starts shouting, "Leave me, leave me, leave me." And the king says, "You have held it and you have to leave it." You know, no, no, that has gravitated me, it's not leaving. The king goes and pulls him, he doesn't come. And now the king tells the saint, "You are a fool." And now the saint says, "This is Maya. We hold on to something and we say we don't, that doesn't leave us. Your rote learning is a Maya. We hold on to that rote learning and we don't let it happen unless the process of learning, or the process of learning is addressing to memorization. The process of learning is not addressing to learning. I think if we bring this paradigm shift, things will be all right.
I think wonderful point that leads me. So what you have done is you've really taken me to the next question very nicely. And what comes to my mind is that, as you rightly said, that uh, for whatever we want to call rote learning, or whatever NEP calls rote learning, and we'll assume that there is something called rote learning.
Convenience.
Right, convenience, right? So you have rightly put the word convenience, and also the desire to do well in assessment, the pressure of doing well in assessment, and also and because that pressure is there, uh, in fact, what happens is the teachers who practice learning by memorization, okay, and prefer the note taking and giving notes to make sure that everybody has the right notes, because and that problem is not in schools also, by the way. I want to point it out that even while I was doing my master's in mathematics from Delhi University, we would go to our classrooms and our professors would actually come and write down the notes on the blackboard, and we would sit there like idiots and monkeys, copying those notes, because the mobile phones were not accessible during those times. Otherwise, we could have just taken a snap of the shot after the professor was done. But we would copy it and then memorize it, and then still I managed to get, like, 90+% in my masters, all through this whole process. So it's not just limited to schools. But what happens is that teachers who promote uh, this method of rote learning, of giving notes and memorizing, they are more popular than teachers who are focusing on developing the conceptual understanding of students. So my question comes from there. Why would a teacher lose his popularity, okay, take a tougher role, not to be sure whether his kids will pass the exams? Why would he want to do that? And as you rightly said, whether it's Maya or whether, I mean, he is stuck to the process of, and all of us have seen, even in the best of schools in Delhi, there are teachers who are actually asking students to underline questions in the book and saying that this part is the answer to question number 5, this part is the answer to question number 6, and they don't even teach the entire chapter. They just make them underline the answers to all the questions at the back of the book. Now, this is a harmful culture, as educationists, I don't think that any one of us can deny that this is happening. And I don't think any one of us can deny that this is harmful. But what is the motivation? What is the incentive for a teacher to move away from the culture of rote learning? Because I don't see that in the system. Dr. Bali, over to you. Why would teachers want to deviate away from the culture of what is in it for them?
Uh, Dr. Nishchal, let me first answer the first part of what you're saying, and what Bala sir said. It's very convenient for everybody. You know, we do a lot of things for convenience. It's convenient for a teacher to get the students to read a piece and underline the answers, look at the questions and then underline the answers. It's convenient for the child to mug up those answers. It's convenient for the parent to assist the child because it's all there on a platter. And it's great when the child does well, apparently does well in terms of marks, right? So it's very convenient. It's all a matter of convenience. But at the same time, I think a lot of us forget that we are detracting from the real purpose of education. The real purpose of education should be essentially about prodding children to ferret out information, not give them information on a platter. Prod them to look for information, get them to ferret out the information, stimulate their critical thinking skills, and force them to ask questions and find answer to those questions. Look at some kind of case studies and also draw their inferences from those case studies. Work collaboratively with their peers, because I find particularly in international curriculum, and I'm talking about because as I represent an international school, therefore I'm talking from that perspective. I think we have this advantage with the children, very young children from a very young age, when they just about start school in the primary years program. You have different units of inquiry which are transdisciplinary in nature. So there is no standalone subject, except of course some languages which could be standalone, or dance and music and so on and so forth. Everything is transdisciplinary. The ability to draw, to make connections, the ability to understand a concept that runs across various subjects, the spirit of inquiry that starts with the inquiry and then concept and then final lines of inquiry, and then looking for for information, researching for that information very carefully under controlled conditions with the assistance of their parents, engaging the parents, and then allowing children to articulate their learning. I think, and working collaboratively. In the process, the children, right from a very young age, start to learn the skills, the real life skills, or what we normally call 21st century skills. To me, they're not 21st century skills, they're perennial skills. Skills that people have or should, those are skills that we've always placed a very high premium on. So the skills of problem solving, right? So skills of critical thinking, skills of articulation, skills of presentation, those are skills that children need to learn. So let's not just go with this whole thing about convenience. I think that's simple. That's awfully wrong to simply expect that children should be given everything on a platter. We can give them for a few years, but what after a few years when they leave the alma mater, where are they? That way I find that children who study the international curriculum, with all due regard to a national curriculum, I'm sure I have been part of the national curriculum for many, many years. However, for the last 10 years, I'm observing that when you're teaching or transacting the international curriculum, the skills that you leave with make your post-secondary education, particularly overseas, that much easier, because you've really picked up the essential skills: referencing, researching, citation. I was talking, I myself teach a subject called theory of knowledge. I cannot go unprepared to class because I have to be ready to face a lot of questions. And my class starts with, what are the questions you have for me today? Right? So I think education has just completely undergone a paradigm shift. And with the new education policy coming into force, I think everything should change. if it is implemented in spirit, everything is likely to change.
But then my question still remains, what is in it for the teacher? Absolutely, I agree with you. It should change. But I mean, see, in an international curriculum, obviously you have to follow certain guidelines set by the international board. Now,
Right, right.
till the time we feel that the national board and the state boards in India can also come up with similar guidelines, okay? We most of our audience is with state boards or central board of secondary education. Uh, what if those curriculum requirements do not change? If the change is not forced down upon me from top down, what is in it for me to make that change? Why should I change?
A sense of gratification, obviously. Why should you not want to change it? Why should you not want to be different? We just had this teacher from a rural background winning a global teacher award. Why did that happen? Why
Right.
is it that that teacher could do it and the others couldn't do it?
Great.
So it is possible. It is possible provided you are driven. It is possible provided you draw gratification if you're not averse to change and you want to create change. If you
Great. So
don't want to create
I
change,
think yes,
then the whole world can't force you.
yes. So
I
I think you
mean,
answered
then
the
you
question.
just
Yeah,
carry
you
on towing the
answered the
line.
question that it's an internal drive, internal professional
Yes.
drive that would make you change.
It's for
You don't
intrinsic
have to.
motivation. I
Yes. So
Yeah.
nobody has to wait for the classroom for the teacher in the next classroom to change before changing. I think
As for who
if
says the
you
national
as
curriculum, in any case, gives you the liberty to experiment as much as you want up to grade 8. Who's forcing
absolutely,
you? Who's
absolutely.
forcing you to use rote learning?
So
You
it's
have all the
really
liberty in the
not
world to
about
experiment, innovate. Who's stopping
right.
you?
So it's not about really curriculum. It's about your personal choice as a teacher. I'm going to go to Arati with,
Absolutely. In my
and I'm going to go with Arati with a different question, Arati. Okay, so convenience, as we have seen that rote memorization or rote teaching. Let's not call rote learning, rote teaching. Uh, is dependent, is one of the factors is convenience. Now the United States has been the biggest marketer of convenience, whether it's convenient shopping or convenient traveling or convenient everything, convenience in lifestyle. I think it all starts from there and then comes to India. Now the big question is, if convenience is the real driver of rote teaching or rote learning, then I would assume that that convenient method would be prevalent in all school districts in the US also. In your experience, how much of the education in the US is rote learning or rote driven, especially in the lower classes? Your thoughts on that, Rati?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I just want to make one point. I want to think about the words education and educating. We give an education, but are we educating the students or the learner, right? The learner could be a teacher, it could be a child, it could be whoever, right? So that's just one little thing I want to put in your head. In the US, there is, a variety of, again, it all comes with, I will say, um, a culture of learning that is in a school district. What is the leadership, what have you set as the culture and the tone? Yes, you have a syllabus, you have certain they call them the standards. That's the equivalent of a syllabus in India. But you have these standards that you have to meet. How you get to them is up to each school district. So it depends on what kind of methodology, and it comes from, it has to start from the leadership angle. If you as leaders emulate and role model what you want to see in the classrooms, that's what's going to happen. You have to share that vision, you have to share that behavior, you have to share that, I'll give you an example. If you want, as Dr. Bali said, if you want those questions to be asked by the students, you want a student-centered classroom, you want that sense of inquiry and curiosity and all of that. You as leaders in the school have to have that too. You have a staff meeting. Have your teachers ask questions versus, you're constantly just giving information, right? What are your questions? What are your challenges? What are your successes? Where are you going to innovate? Pose challenges. So if you bring about that whole culture, it gets pervasive in the whole system. And that's what drives, to your point earlier, it drives the teacher to, be that agent of change and be that catalyst for change in the classroom. And the students see it, and that's how, the rote learning or the memorization just doesn't even, you have these kids who have photographic memory, you're not going to stop them from memorizing things, that's just going to happen. But that whole culture of questioning, that culture of exploring, the culture of trying new things, as long as you meet those standards at some point, yeah, why not? Give them it's almost like you give them a sort of a framework, or, the non-negotiables. Here are your non-negotiables, or here are your, and work within that. It's like freedom within a structure, if you want to call it. Choose what works for you as a teacher, and what works for your classroom. And it could change day to day, because kids change day to day too, right? So you have to adjust.
Yeah. So I think the message that I'm getting from you is that our kids can, begin to think if we set up a culture to think. And I think that starts from the teacher itself. Is that the message? Am I getting the right message?
Yes. And, the teacher is almost like the fulcrum, right? And you have the students, and you have, you have your principal, you have the leadership that's setting that vision, but it's together. You're not doing it in silos. You kind of have to work. And, as you know, education is not educating is not the flip of a switch. It's right. It's not that instant gratification. Hey, I did it, and you get it. But no, it comes over time. And if we start from the early grades, it kind of permeates through and moves on into the higher education.
Yes, and I think that's where the worry is, that we are looking at a reform in elementary education, but sometimes what happens is there's another problem, that to be able to move away from rote learning, because as everybody has said, it's a matter of convenience. A child can, a teacher can initiate thinking only if he is a thinking mind, and that would also mean that teacher has a very good grasp over the subject that the teacher is teaching. Because for you, one of the scares among teachers is that if my students start thinking more than I do, they're going to ask me questions that I can't answer, and therefore I would have to go back to my classrooms to start learning my subject again. Because your own command over your subject gives you the confidence to allow others to think about that subject. So that might be one of the factors also, is how prepared our teachers are. So Bala sir, I'm going to ask you this question: how prepared our teachers are to really move into a culture of thinking away from the culture of rote learning?
Well,
but I'll have to give you only 2 minutes, because after that I'll start taking up questions.
Yeah, but I will see. I'm going to hit one psychological aspect of it. You see, all humans are driven by pain or pleasure. In the human brain, you got a pain center and a pleasure center, right? And it could be driven both by individual consciousness as well as social consciousness. We have positioned Indian education more with the pain center rather than the pleasure center. So everything becomes more a pain rather than a pleasure. So learning is a pain, performance is a pain, right? And this pain is not experienced by the learner, but it is impacted by the society, is impacted by everybody else. You have got to achieve it. Therefore, because of the fear of this social impact, we avoid the pleasure of learning. I'll give a very simple example to you. We learn cycle. How many times we fall in cycle? And you go and tell your father, I have fallen from the cycle. The father will say, cycle seekhna hai to 10 baar giroge. But the same thing with the mathematics, if you go, the father will say that, right? Because the objectives are different. We have become totally a utilitarian society, and therefore teachers have got to serve for the utility of the school institution and the leaders of the institution. I bet only one thing to answer your question. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of teachers who are very creative. I've also seen principals who say, आप जो पढ़ाते वो बुक में नहीं है, बच्चा कैसे पढ़ेगा? How will the child learn to know? So the question is, we are a very complicated situation where it is not a top-down approach. As a director in CBSE, I used to tell schools that up to 8th class, you have got all the freedom to do what you want. You are the monarchs of the situation. But then they will say, 6th class में, 5th class में, CBSE pattern का question. अरे क्यों कर रहे हो? Right? And therefore, we have to break open the shackles of fear and then move towards the pleasure of learning and create that kind of a feeling in institutions, individuals, teachers, parents, educating parents and students. I think learning has got to move towards a pleasureful lifetime experience, right? And that is the answer. So that for that to happen, political interventions have to be there, because most of our policies are being, articulated on the political needs rather than the social needs. I think we have a lot of complications on that. But let me tell you, I have at least 60% of teachers, given an opportunity, they can really do magic, as they have done during this, COVID time, how they were able to cope, right? That competency is done. We have not nurtured it. That's my answer.
I think that's a great answer for all of the participants. Let me pick up some questions from people. So these are, we invite people to submit us questions when they register, as well as they're putting it on the question and answer board. This is a question from Anju Krishna from Kuwait. The question is, some students, even though they know the concepts very clearly, they find it very difficult to express themselves. They try to take it by heart. They try to memorize by heart all the answers because they lack that skill of expression. How can we help those children? I don't know. Arati, you want to take this?
Yeah, I think, it's again about what you're doing in building up those skills for those students in the classroom. Giving them those opportunities to present, to articulate, to express, giving them that freedom to, to make mistakes, right? I mean, that's the other piece that is lacking. It's like everything has to be perfect. No, I mean, what is perfect? So giving that, and you said earlier, the teacher will feel that, oh my gosh, my students know more than I do. I have to go back. It's okay. It's okay. Why can't you learn as a teacher? Why can't you learn from your students too? It's this symbiotic relation. You're kind of saying that everybody is a learner. So in that context, to answer the person's question, Anu's question is giving giving them projects, giving them those opportunities throughout the year to build up those skills. It's not going to come overnight. Whether you do it projects, do it as group projects or individual projects, or have peer-to-peer feedback, or whatever, like giving them practice. They practice is what is important.
The idea is, instead of pushing them, we need to push them to develop those skills. I'll take one more question.
Atul, I just have to respond one answer.
Yes.
The question has a small problem. When they say expression, what kind of an expression? There are 100 ways of communicating, but we want the child to express the word one and the only way as I want.
Yeah.
That's where the whole problem comes over.
The marking scheme.
So the child could express in 101 ways, and we could assess in whatever way they do. We understand that. So long cognition is okay, right? The expression, the variety could always be there. We don't agree on that. That's a problem.
Absolutely. So we want them to express the way we want them to express. I'll take another question from Regi Uman. He's the principal of Indian school in Oman. The question is, it is said active learning could provide children with a more immersive learning experience which engages them physically, mentally, and emotionally. How can we do? How can we do that? I think is the question. So, how can we provide children that active learning experience? I think I've understood Reggie's question correctly. So, Dr. Bali, you want to take this up? In fact, there are two more questions by him, and one of them is in a heterogeneous class, how can we develop a dynamic, highly collaborative, um, and values independent thinking and ideas among the children in order to do away with rote learning? So, how do we do thinking in a heterogeneous class? And when you have, how can we develop independent thinking? That's also one of his questions. You want to address this, Dr. Bali?
Yes. The second question, you want me to address the second one first?
Both of them, I think, both of
In
them
a
would be very linked to each other.
Yes, yes. First, I think both the questions are very, very relevant. When we talk about learning the class, that is learning that has to be stimulated by thinking, all right? Using thinking as a tool, using your environment as a stimulus. You have to push children to learn from their environment, within the environment, learn with the teacher, learn with one another, learn through activities. So you have to provide a lot of stimulus in a classroom. You cannot merely rely on books and you cannot ask questions. You have to prompt them to ask questions, to raise questions and answer those, find answers for those questions. When learning is self-driven, it'll last a lifetime. When learning is by rote, it may not last a lifetime. So first, teaching the children to learn how to learn. I know it sounds very cliche and much used, but the truth is we have to teach children to learn how to learn. So creating an environment where children are given that kind of stimulus and are provided the right kind of tools, whether they are tech tools or manipulators in a classroom with younger children, or an environment that stimulates thinking. When you stimulate that kind of thinking, learning is going to last. And another thing that Balaji said, which is absolutely right, the principles of pain and pleasure. When you make learning a joyful experience, when you make learning a celebration, children are going to enjoy it and it is going to last a lifetime. So you have to make sure that you do not treat learning as a painful experience. You have to devise ways and means of giving children the opportunities to express themselves in multiple ways, not straitjacket them. You don't go with a mark scheme and say, well, here is the mark scheme. If you don't adhere to it, to me, you have failed. Another thing is no child should be left behind. In a heterogeneous classroom, you need to have differential learning. Now, you need to identify cohorts, right? There are children who may be very bright. You have the system of grouping. You put some very bright children with the ones apparently who are little slow in picking up. So you have heterogeneous groups. Children learn very well from one another. And when you have those kind of, groups created in a classroom, children learn beautifully from one another. So
Yeah.
push the children to teach the other children, peer learning. So when you do that in a heterogeneous classroom, when you're non-judgmental, when you do not brand children, when you do not identify them as very bright and very dull, where your remarks are not corrosive, because it can lead to a lot of emotional scarring. Corrosive remarks by a teacher can lead to a lot of emotional scarring. So in a heterogeneous classroom, please use differential teaching learning, identify children, put them in groups which are not that whole concept of creating a group which is above the others. Don't create groups as per their capacity, as per their learning ability, but create heterogeneous groups also. So children will learn with one another and everyone will pick up momentum. I mean, that's what I've realized in a classroom as an educator, that children invariably pick up momentum.
So they are ready to think. We just have to make them think. Arati, I have two questions for you. One of them is
Yes.
related to what Dr. Bali just said. And one of them is coming in my mind, so I'm going to shoot it off because this is also an opportunity for me to learn from experts. So I don't want to miss that opportunity also. So the first question is, and this is the question raised by Gurpreet Kaur from New Delhi. Um what is the, and her question is, what is the use of killing the rote learning if question papers are not designed innovatively? What is your opinion? What, in your opinion, is the best way to ensure innovative question papers? And this also kind of links with what Dr. Bali just said, that look, we need to ask questions. We need to start, making students think. A lot of times, when we ask, teachers also to create problems on a given text, they cannot sometimes create problems beyond what is given at the back of the book. The best teachers can only modify those questions slightly and create some versions of those questions. So how important is the teacher's ability to ask innovative questions, and how can they learn to do that? That's first question. The second question is, we are moving into a era of blended learning. I don't think that, by 2025 there would not be many schools who would not be using technology at all. We would be using some form of technology somewhere. Now, this penetration of technology in our schools, can it aid to move away from this culture of memorization and move towards learning? Can that be put to use by teachers? So these two questions, if you can answer very, very briefly, obviously.
Sure. Yeah, so, I'll answer Gurpreet's question about innovative question papers and, how do we get our teachers to write or ask better questions. I know last week, I know we've talked a lot about Bloom's taxonomy and those things as different levels of learning. It's about that. How do you ask those deeper questions, those higher level questions? How do you, versus those rote learning, those L1, L2, those first level questions? Yes, you have to ask some of those. I'm not saying you don't, but how do you devise those questions? And that comes with training. That's another little tool in the tool belt of the teacher that we have to provide. How do we write those questions? What does it mean? How do we, and then it goes back into the classroom. How do you help your students to don't give them the answer, but how do you think about the answer? And there is no, at the highest level, there is no right or wrong answer. It's an opinion. It's almost like an opinion question. So training the teachers on how do you even evaluate those, right? That it's not easy for everyone, because as you know, we have all gone through some amount of this rote learning instruction, and so have a lot of our teachers, and so is the BEd program and all of that. So how do we help them unlearn and learn new things, unlearn the old and learn new things? So I think that is that piece about questions. Blended learning, absolutely. I mean, I have seen many fabulous examples of really good infusion of technology. I mean, right from the basic of, you just use the Google Suite products, right? I mean, you use a Google Doc and you bring collaboration right into there. Okay. And, if the teacher can comment if they suppose you're writing an essay, kind of, instead of giving the answer to a grammatically correct sentence, you ask the question to the student, like, how can you rephrase this sentence versus this is how you rephrase the sentence, right? So that kind of brings a little bit about, or two students are working on the same document or the same project, that brings about that collaboration. The other model I feel in the blended model is, Khan Academy has definitely exemplified this as the flipped model, but you don't have to use Khan Academy. You can use your own methodology, giving what you're going to teach as homework, right? You create a video, or you create, a PowerPoint or whatever, and you give it as homework. And then you have, almost like an entry ticket to your classroom. So you have to do this little test, almost like a quiz, make it fun, do a quiz. And the teacher gets those responses before the teacher gets to the classroom the next day. So the teacher already knows those gaps. Where are the learning gaps on that particular topic? So you then, that whole differentiated piece comes in. So there's so many different, and there's so many other products that you can use for collaboration and student voice and things like that, where you can really give students that opportunity to choose what they want to share and then ask them why they chose that, right? And that becomes that assessment piece, and it kind of rolls into the next thing. So again, going back to what I said earlier about the culture shift, this, it's a whole system, right? Even the parents have to be brought into this, like, okay, there's not just a textbook, there's not just marks, it's not like first rank, second rank, all of that. How do you shift that whole culture within a system? I mean, the external system is in its own capacity. That is not, we have to think about that later. But I'm just
In fact, Arati, I'm sorry to interrupt you. In fact,
no.
the next question, because we're just 4 minutes away from closing, and we always close on time. Very quickly, I want to take this up because this is a new question. What is the parents' role in promoting this culture? So, parents are Sandhya. This is Sandhya Nitin, and she's written, parents are the main hindrance to analytical understanding in a child. When a 3-4 year old asks insensitive questions to his or parents, they are asked to obey and not to be a nuisance. Who will explain, encourage an inquiring mind in your kids to parents? In the 11th standard IBDP, I keep request students, please ask me questions, get your concepts, ideas, and analysis clear. The students are too frightened to even open their mouth to ask a question. So there is also a cultural game going on here, which is influenced by parents and how we teach our kids that the good kids are who obey elders, and the ones who question too much are the rebels. So, Bala sir, over to you. I think this is a bigger global cultural question, and I want your opinion on this.
Yeah, see, basically the question is that when a child asks a question, it's not to the individual, it is to a system, it is a concept, it's a thought. What happens is when most questions are asked, teachers try to take it personally, right? And so is the parent. Parents don't want the teacher to be offended, right? And apart from that, we have brought our family system in such a way that obedience is a what do you call the watchword for the success of the family, right? Therefore, a differentiated thinking or enterprise is not encouraged by the parents and considered as a kind of a threat to them, right? And that's one of the reasons that our system, right from KG onwards, has not grown, right? We need, Madam was talking about the 21st century. It's not a 21st century. It's a perennial life skill that we need. The entire Indian mind, entire Indian system has worked only on questioning skill. I will conclude with only one statement. We have got to go back thousands of years, rather a few hundreds of years, and I will conclude with the statement of Confucius. He said, learning without thinking is useless. Thinking without learning is dangerous. I think that's the answer.
I think that's a very good statement. Dr. Bali, your closing statements, what is the message that you would want to give to our audience on this topic?
I would say do not completely condemn rote learning because it sounds newfangled to condemn it and to go for, learning not by rote. It's got its uses and its advantages. So look at it very, very mindfully. However, encourage students, teachers, encourage children to think out of the box, prompt them to ask questions, ask them to devise solutions, and teach them to learn collaboratively and to express, to present what they're learning. Give them opportunities, finally, give them opportunities to reflect on their thinking. That is very important because not many students are taught how to reflect on their thinking.
Thank you, ma'am. You very rightly said. That's, I think, the reflection is one of the integral parts of critical thinking. We really can't, and also, metacognition. We need to teach kids how to think, how they are thinking, and those things are very important. Rati, your closing statement, what's your message to the audience?
My message is, support our teachers and our staff with every tool in their tool belt. Any, it's like a Swiss Army knife. Give them the tools so that they can succeed in the classroom, so that they can provide these experiences and opportunities for the students in the class. Because unless they can model it, they can experience it for themselves. I think experiential learning for our teachers is equally important for them, so that they can then impart it in their classrooms.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. Nobody can teach golf to somebody if they still, themselves don't play golf. So if I don't indulge in critical thinking, it's going to be impossible for me to teach somebody critical thinking. So that's where we need to start. We had a great discussion today on a topic which is related and might be more in news in the future. Next week, well, actually, next week is Christmas, 25th. So I wish all of you Merry Christmas. We are going to be now meeting in the new year. So Happy New Year to you also. The topic of our discussion when we step into 2021 is going to be very important, is the learner controls the learning. We are moving in an era where the onus of learning, because of blended learning and also because of NEP recommendations, the onus of learning is going to start shifting from the teachers to the students. It's very important for us to train our students how to learn, how to develop those learning skills. And that is the era we are going into. It might not be easy for teachers to lose that control. It never is. It is never easy for the mother-in-law to lose control of the kitchen to her daughter-in-law. It is never easy for a father to lose control of his business to his son. It is very difficult for a teacher to lose control of learning to the student, because we have controlled it over the ages. But honestly, it'll have to be done. There is no real option. So we are going to be discussing that if we move from a teacher controlled learning environment to a learner controlled learning environment, what are the challenges we may face and what are the ways we can address those challenges. We'll do that in the first week of 2021. Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy New Year. I really want to thank my guests. Dr. Bali, thank you very much for joining us. Arati, thank you very much for being with us. I hope you guys can come back again and share your thoughts. Balaji, always, I'm indebted to you. Thank you very much for your insights. And please take care of yourself. Wear your masks. Stay indoors. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Thank you very much for joining us on Friday at 5.